Hey guys, welcome to an episode that's going to be long. It might be confusing. I might be flopping all over the map, but be patient, hang in there, and remember there's always really cool guitars for you to look at in the background. You see that? Good. So I called this one Your First IEP. Now some of you watching have been through an IEP already. Some of you have had a good experience. Others may not have had a good experience. You may have developed biases that cause you to kind of look at what I'm saying and go, oh, that's very idealistic, etc. But hang with it and get to the end. And sometimes it takes me a while to do that. Now, I've got a stack of books here. I've got actual IEPs. There's 4 of them here. And this box right here is actually from 1 year of IEPs, and everybody was lawyered up. There were all kinds of specialist reports, some of them originating from sources far too close to me. But we're going to keep names and all that out of it and keep on principles. Now, one of the worst things about IEPs is all these abbreviations and terms that we don't understand. It's an individualized education program. They may call it something else where you're at. If you're in Canada, it's certainly called something else. But in the end, an IEP is meant to provide access to your child. Now, I've done a couple other episodes. The first one, the intro, there will be links popping in up there. I like these pointers. They let me kind of emphasize things like that really cool guitar up there. But when I point up here, typically there will be something to pop up on. At the end of the episode, you can go back and click on those, or if you feel that you need to pick up what that topic was, that's probably a good idea. But at the end of it, you're going to learn that in the intro episode, I introduced myself as the father of a CdLS child. And my experience is such that when I see her life, I see a birth date and I see an end date. So my experience, the earthly day in, day out, school, medical, home life experience has been completed. Does that make my experience more relevant than someone else's? Definitely not. But there is no fight anymore. There is no war anymore. There is no concern. There's no finger pointing. There's none of that going on in my experience anymore. And that might be valuable. The second thing that you need to know is that I sit on a school board, and I'm going into my 10th year of service. And so I know what boring school board meetings are, where they're bringing you budget, first interim, second interim, unaudited actuals, the LCAP system where you base your focuses, your educational focus, and your program administration, and your planning, and your staff development based on a dashboard that's got numbers here based on how you're dealing with certain subcategory. That's all part of it. But then there's also those times that are very rewarding, like graduation, seeing kids go across the stage. Sometimes I think we forget that kids have a job from the time they're 3, 4, all the way up till they're 18 and beyond, and that job is to be a student, and it's a serious job, and I think it's important that we recognize that. One of the worst parts about being a school board member is you're being presented with cases in the back that call for people to be expelled, suspended, and all kinds of things that you realize, especially if you have a special needs child, these are life-altering decisions that somehow are being put onto you because your name popped up most frequently in the voting booth. By the way, I don't care what party you are. I don't care who we're going to vote for. I may be affected by things that are going on, but that is not my focus when it comes to individual students and the students as a collective, in my duty to represent them. And finally, I work for a public agency that's taxpayer funded. I'm virtually the manager of that agency in that function, and we are output based. We do something for the taxpayer, and I'm highly cognizant that I don't set the taxpayer expectation. But in other words, I think the average taxpayer would look at the work that my team and I does with the supports we have and would say, yeah, I really think that it's reasonable. I'm getting my money's worth. And that's what makes me up. Again, the intro episode is up there. I also want to tell you that I did an episode that was about the difference between medical needs and medical determination. That's a word you're going to hear in IEP meetings. And educational based system. So typically your early intervention stuff, you get your diagnosis for CdLS, you have multiple births, you have some genetic issue. The early intervention services are going to be there. They're usually provided by your county Department of Health. The funding mechanism might be county, state, federal, whatever that is. But those programs are geared basically on a medical diagnosis to say, if we put effort in early, that effort will improve the situation rather than starting the support later. And I've told you in that episode again up there that that those programs usually involve a lot of parental contact, because if you're the parent that's dropping the kid off to the therapy, you're dropping the child off, the therapist comes out, takes them back. I've encouraged you not to waste everyone's time, doing constant opinions and advice and updating something you just found out on Google that you think your professional therapist who's been doing it for years just has to know. Avoid that. Let them do the work, and then when they come out, be open to what they have to tell you. And again, they're going to tell you, you could do this at home, you could do this at home. I only see this child for a half an hour once a week. You could do this. And meanwhile, you're virtually overwhelmed. If you are overwhelmed to the point where one bit of additional therapy and feeling responsible for no result is going to disrupt the happy times that you're having with your child, not good. You are good enough, whatever that means. If you can present your child with a smile and some time on a guitar, you're doing a great job, because sometimes it never gets there. It becomes about other things. I also did an episode called Are You Fighting for Nothing? And that was basically preparing you for this part, because we're going to get the emotions, we're going to get the theory out of the way, we're going to get you in the right place. And then we're going to talk about what this process looks like. Let's start with the law. Okay, on the topic of law, this hits home for me. My job is such that it always seems like I have been around stuff that might bring attorneys in. I used to work in the oil fields. There are environmental attorneys around that. I ran cranes. There's huge dangers with cranes. There are accidents, there's investigations, all those kinds of things. I never had that experience, and I'm sad for the people that have. But even my job now, this is kind of how I dress. I throw on a blazer, and if you know my name, it's pretty easy to use Google AI function or Chat GPT or whatever it is, and just say, who is this guy? And the whole story rolls out. It's crazy. I had a school board meeting the other night, and there was a controversial topic, and within 4 hours of the article being published in one part of California that's got probably 250,000 people in the valley, That was coupled with an expose that they did about the topic in the LA Times, and it just threw it all together. It looked at foundational stuff I had going on years ago and how I am geared to strategize things to make sure that the outcome of the topic being discussed is student benefit and not some corporate structure or financial thing going on in the background that might lead to an exposure in my little district, and I'll leave that at that. But at the end of the day, I hear people saying, well, it's the law, I'm going to file a complaint. Or it's almost as if they feel that the law was built for a person to have this policing force in the background that they can sick on somebody anytime that they feel that their idea of what should happen doesn't happen, and then somehow justice is going to be metered out against the people that have crossed the line with whatever their theory might be. So let's talk a little bit about where special education law started. If you know anything about the guitars that I build and the people that play them, you're going to realize pretty quickly that the roots music of the blues is founded in slave and sharecropper music. People communicating and saying things through music by singing songs in the field that the guy with the shotgun couldn't understand. You know, nuanced communication. You'll find on my guitar channel that I do some bits about history, and I find a sympathetic view of these people just disgusting. So, for example, there were a father and son team that would go around and record everyone and make comments like, those people, these people are a well-meaning, generally good group of people. It's like, what is that? Do you hear yourself? So somehow you're up here looking down upon everybody. And sometimes the dynamic of an IEP, not on purpose, just by just differences of the people participating, can kind of make people feel that way, put them on edge, make them defensive, and actually cause them not to realize that there's a missing part of a team, and that's why the parent is there. There are things that I can tell you that I knew about Tam just by being her dad, just by being at home, just by seeing how she, was every day, that the team found profound. So, a little bit about law. I'm not a lawyer. I am exposed to law and legal requirements frequently. They're an inherent part of my job. There's been some significant cases in California, one in particular that had to do with me and my job, that went all the way up to the California Supreme Court through an appeal process that somebody was trying to push an issue basically over something that involved a resource that was actually causing damage to unsafe situations for people. It was an environmental issue. We'll leave it at that. So Tammy's older sister Kendra is about 5 months from getting her JD, which is Juris Doctorate, and then she's going to be able to take the bar, and I think her intention is California and Nevada. But when she was taking some college classes, she started building up a big sociology part, and then went into a music minor, even though she never played any music instrument or anything. Knows a lot about the bands that have my guitars, and a lot. You don't want to play Music Jeopardy with Kendra from the time she was very small. But and then she took that into studying entertainment law, and there are all kinds of parts about that. The music industry is very volatile. It's not artist friendly anymore. And so there's a number of things that she's looking at, and she'll get her placement wherever life takes her. But she's had seen a lot of what was going on in this box in 2013, and I think it kind of propelled her to take a look at law as a career, but she realized even back then, in order to make any money as a lawyer in special education, you're probably going to have to go to work for what is the school district, because that's where the budget is. While I'm there, I really hate to see, as a school board member, people canceling IEP meetings at the last minute, knowing that the parent has an advocate coming or even an attorney. And if that's a strategy, you're not in the right business if you're doing that. Anyway, Kendra didn't want to drive for a while, and then she figured out, well, I have school board meetings and city council meetings and commission meetings on these certain days of the week, so I had one day of the week open. And so she said, you can give me a ride, and then rather than sit in the car and talk to yourself or do cheesy videos from your car, apparently that's not desired in the YouTube world. Anyway, she had enrolled me in the paralegal program and intro to law and handed me a textbook. So I went with her all the way. I'm waiting to finish one class, which is legal writing, which is probably the best class that I was suited for from the beginning. But at the end of the day, I've had some paralegal training to the point where I could get a certification in California, as long as I can finish that legal writing class, which is oddly enough held only on Thursdays and the colleges around, so I'll have to leave the school board, etc., to get that class finally. So I do understand the basic framework of law. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the framework of law, so you understand what it means when people start throwing out the term, I'm going to lawyer up, I'm going to take you to court, all that kind of thing. There are a number of laws that each have a purpose. There's constitutional law, there's criminal law, there's civil law. So let's talk a little bit about each one of those. There's a constitutional law that says it's your constitutional right to do this, to have this, or to have access to that. That's not something that everybody wants to take to court all the time. We're not going to go back and figure out what Thomas Jefferson said very often and see if it fits to our specific situation. So when you start going to a lawyer and saying, hey, I want to challenge the First Amendment, they're probably going to go, yeah, no, that's never going to make it past superior court. The other side will file for summary judgment, which means there's not enough here to throw this out. So criminal law, that means that you have done something really serious that I don't care if you want to press charges. The police, the DA, whoever's the governing agency is saying, I don't care if your victim wants to press charges. This is egregious enough that we can't have this happening in society. Taking of a soul is typically one of those things. You're not supposed to hurt, kill, maim, kidnap people, all those kinds of things. Okay, moving on. Civil law is different than criminal law. So in civil law, you basically have things like breach of contract or some kind of argument about, did someone convert someone else's property? That's an interesting concept. That means I basically did something to take something that was legally yours. It might be music rights, it might be royalties, it might be a property, and I basically diminished the value of it. So there's a loss that can involve personal injury, so I am not the same as I was before you drove into me with your car. My car is different. The insurance companies aren't taking care of the bills. In fact, the first tort case or kind of civil case in the United States was Paulsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. And that sounds a lot like my last name. So lawyers all of a sudden remember their bar exam and know how to pronounce my last name. Most people don't. But anyway, civil law seeks to provide a restoration of loss. Now, every once in a while, you will get something egregious and a jury will award some ridiculous amount where we just go, how could that happen? And sometimes the purpose of a civil law ruling or finding is listen, we're going to send out a statement. I'm sorry that it's you that we're making an example out of, but this just can't be. You'll find this in chemical cases and in corporate wrongs to the public, whatever. But you want to remember now that when we get into special education law, it's neither criminal nor is it civil. It is an administrative function in which I might file a complaint. The state agency takes a look at it, and they look at the basic facts and have a finding, and that finding tends to be restorative. Okay, so for example, let's say that I have a therapist, and let's say within my child's IEP, which is a living, breathing document that outlines the resources, the services that will be provided, the accommodations that will be provided, and there's a failure to provide those services in the frequency and duration that it says in here. It might be nothing about the services, but there's this idea that something isn't going to happen because if it was determined in the IEP meeting that the child needed one session of a half hour a week and one session of a group for 1 hour a week, and somebody's missing those services, the idea is that the IEP team and the assessment professionals would not have said, yeah, we need to do this, if the idea was that somebody was going to do it. So if I were to make a complaint over that, like I said in the Are You Fighting for Nothing video, if I'm going to make a complaint because somebody missed a session on a day that was a public holiday, I can file that, but on the form it will ask you, what's the issue? What is the precedent? In other words, what does it say in the IEP? What did you agree to? And then the most important part, what did you try to do before you resolved this issue before you came to file a state complaint? Anybody can file a state complaint, but once it gets there, it's like, well, I didn't talk to anybody. I'm just going to put the hammer down by going to the top right away. That's kind of like not talking to a teacher and showing up at the school board meeting in public comment, where, by the way, in a school board meeting, public comment that's not on agenda items, the board can't respond back to you. It's not on the agenda. Some people like to use that just to blast something and just, you don't do this, you don't do that. You just sit there silently, and they know the game, and you sit there silently and you go, wow, what a life you must have at home, etc., etc. All the little verbal things. You got to keep that face straight when you're thinking this stuff too. But anyway, filing a state complaint, you have to realize at the end, it's going to be what was lost in terms of time and frequency, and how that's going to be made up. You don't get extra services. It's not the place to argue what your child needs. It's just basically remedy based. And sometimes people don't see that when you file the complaint, creates a great deal of stress, mistrust, and you have to remember that you're not in control of who is going to supply the remedy for the finding. Let's say the state says you've got 20 hours of some type of therapy, OT therapy coming, and the district owes you that. Well, you can expect that the same therapist might be the one that you complained about, will be the one delivering the remedy. Think all of that out before you start firing away complaints. So law, that's not a fast track to anything. I think it's time now that we're going to do a really quick briefing on a brief overview of what a special education law development looked like in the United States. Okay, I want you to remember that at the beginning of this episode and some other episodes, I keep trying to instill this foundational understanding that special education developed out of a need for people to have access, reasonable access. So some people do not have unfair access, while other people are denied access to the same thing. Whether that would be, I say whatever I'm thinking, and this is unscripted, but at the end of the day, I have the right to sit in the first seat on the bus if I want to, just like anyone else, unless that bus seat is reserved for someone who has an accommodation. Who thinks in today's world that because I look the way I do, or I have the amount of money I have or don't have, that somehow that arranges access to where I sit on the bus, to where I can go to work, all skill sets being the same, etc., etc. I don't want to get into all this because it's very separating and divisive, but let's just say that there's an idea that all people were created equal, i.e. go back to the Constitution and what it says your constitutional rights are. But there was a time in this country where people actually thought there was differences in access people had. So the civil rights movement, and again, you're talking right downtown where my guitar and the music that feeds this, and if you take the guitars deeper into the access that it gave Tam to express herself and some of the underlying factors of special education, that it all ties together. But special education came about as part of civil rights. You had people with disabilities, and at some point somebody said people who need extra support to access the curriculum that other people have access to, with the idea that you give everybody a curriculum that's state approved by your local school board, whatever that is. We're not talking about that here. But at the end of the day, the average kid in first grade, there's going to be a reasonable expectation by the end of first grade that they will be able to do this, and this. Simple measured state standards. Now there's a group of people that need help accessing the curriculum, meaning I'm going to need a couple little things here to get me to the same standard. Now that standard goes from A plus to D minus and everywhere in between. But I'm going to have some of the supports I need to help me get to second grade. And when you start taking a look at the purpose of education, it's to improve the likelihood that there will be further education. That might look like a high school diploma, it might look like trade school, it might look like college, but at some point, hopefully, it doesn't involve a lifetime of playing video games on somebody's couch and not being employable and self-sufficient, productive citizen of society. That's really what education is all about. So the things that get in the way of people making those steps into the next grade and what goes into the future in terms of education, that is what's important, and that's the foundation for special education. It's those accommodations that are going to help you get to the same place as everybody else, because nobody wants to be completely dependent. And when you hear the term least restrictive environment, that can mean a lot of different things, ranging from making sure that someone who has a visual problem, a hearing problem, a speech problem, whatever those challenges are, has the ability to get to the end and be employable and not living in a group home and those kinds of things, or not being labeled as needing an IEP and special education services and ending up in a special day class because of an issue that should have identified by child find, or somewhere along the way people get sorted and misclassified. Now, there's a couple books I have here. Some of them are, right for the throat. Parents' Guide to IEPs, special education law. There's one called From Emotion to Advocacy. It kind of says, hey, quit displaying your insecurities, feeling like the world is against you, being paranoid, and just being angry. Maybe you haven't come to grips with the reality of the situation, how you feel about it personally, all that kind of thing. These books are guidelines to pinpoint what you can expect out of the educational system, and God forbid that somebody in that educational system isn't perfect in line with what you want. Yeah. Then at the end of that game is this. I wasn't supposed to be able to get this. Due Process Survival Guide. What this does is it says if the parents have and their lawyer have you pinned into a corner, and you've discovered that here, and they're filing a state complaint or filing for due process, the lawyer can come along and say, okay, let's look up where you're at in the process. There's actually charts in here that help you find where you're at, what your exposures are, and then the lawyer takes over recommending what you can do to get the parent to sign the release, take the district out of trouble, and avoid findings that affect scores and credibility and all that kind of thing. So there is an industry built around perception of a law that I think sometimes was faulty to begin with. Okay, if you can get your hand on Ruth Kolker's Disabled Education, I saw Ruth speak, and she goes through every major Supreme Court lawsuit that's been processed through the United States Supreme Court, and it kind of becomes fairly obvious if you've got any experience at all with special education, is that special education, especially in the beginning, provided a means to continue to segregate certain elements of the population by labeling them as this and this and this and needing this type of support. And so they would end up in that room out of there, which was effectively moving them out of what we call mainstreaming now. This is a very interesting read. Okay, I want to talk about one of the worst things in the world. That is the parking lot special education know-it-all club. This is what it looks like. You come in your first day, you drop your kid off. That is a traumatic experience. And you are confronted, because these people, they're all dropping off at the same time you are. And who'd you get? Well, I got Miss Doe. Oh, wow. What did you do in life to get Miss Doe? You know, I heard that Miss Doe one time did this, and then I got an advocate. By the way, advocate is a bad word in special education, because what advocate typically means is the next step to a lawyer. The advocate is coming in there and writing down what no one's doing, and in that way you've got your case built, and they're much cheaper, etc. If that offends you, I'm sorry, you're not one of those people. But if it's offending you, I'd ask yourself what that means. But I did an episode called Underground School Board in a playlist called School Board Insider, and it kind of took a look at all the different things that the perceptions you might have if you're going to try and run for a school board somewhere. You know, what it looks like in closed session where rough decisions are made, what the appropriate relationship is with you and the superintendent, you and staff, and then some of the things that, you know, happen in the background where people are jockeying for position, bullying staff, setting up opportunities for their own children other people don't have anyway. Get ready, it's wild. I'm being really tame here compared to that, but let's get down to right now the topic finally, and let's pretend you are going from Head Start, Regional Center, pre-3-year-old programs. It might be different in your state, but you're going from intervention, medical-based, into special education services, which are designed to be beneficial to gaining access to the curriculum. That's a fancy way of saying my child is going to get some supports based on their eligibility that's going to help them get the same access that the other kids have so they can move up and improve the situation and then get to the part about not sleeping on your couch. So, and you need to be in the right mind. Assume positive intent. The parking lot people, they're not going to help you with that. Your CdLS regional coordinator or the foundation is going to be able to help you with that, because remember, we've talked in the other episodes, your child has something very rare, and in the medical or educational episode, it talked about the rarity. It talked about the remote possibility that your child, that your doctor, whatever your doctor is, there's going to be a bunch of them, neurologist, orthopedic surgeon, dentistry, all of that. The likelihood that any of those people has seen enough of a CdLS population, and there's such diversity between the kids. Some of them are never identified because they're very highly functioning. Some people function moderately. Some people are very, very challenged. So this idea that somebody is going to be an automatic expert, and they might not even know, they might look at this, they might even get on a site and look at the projections and say, based on what I'm seeing here, they might even be misled by some of the stuff that they're reading that's undocumented. I'm looking at an example right here that's one of the most egregious examples of that I've ever seen, that came into one of Tammy's IEP meetings with two lawyers sitting there. I thought, really? So at the end of the day, assume positive intent. If you're not doing that, that kind of leads everybody to a character deficit on your part. And the quicker you get there, your accountability goes completely out the window. Remember, you are there to be the subject matter expert on the functionality of your child on a daily basis. That's what you're there for. I want to tell you that being angry, your accountability and the respect people have for you is going to go down. The first time you mention lawyering up, that means, in reality, I'm going to get a lawyer. You have to, if you're a staff member. You don't just say, oh, they were just upset. You have to report that. And what does that do for staff trust if they're coming to you and maybe they have a question for you and you say, you know, I'm tired of this, you don't even know what you're doing. There's no trust there, and without trust, your accountability goes down. And so don't expose yourself to a legal mindset just by being angry, paranoid, and basically a bully. Try not to do that. And then you want to remember, what if what you're screaming for or demanding, what happens if you get it? Is it going to work? Is it going to help your child get that extra access that they need? Are the scores going to go up? Is it going to take them off the track of Cornelia DeLange? Would it have made me Michael Jordan doing slam dunks in the NBA? There are certain things that are on a track, and that track is not measured in fantasies, theories, or what we read on the internet. It's read by how much progress we're making over measured increments of time, doing things that are identified as needing supports. Those are eligibilities, and putting together a plan of what those supports look like, at what frequency they're going to happen, what the duration of the service is, and how those things are measured through things like goals. And then finally, when you're in there bullying everybody and yelling at everybody and being all freaked out, when you leave, your child isn't there. You're not there anymore. Your child can become the recipient of bitter feelings, resentments, or even retaliation. I would hate to think that last one is there, but I mean, imagine you're looking at a child that has profound disabilities and you're a therapist or a teacher, and you know I can make a difference here. You saw the interview, I think there's a link up there where Tammy's OT that she worked with for 8 years told you what it was like to work with Tammy and what her ideas are about being a professional supplying those services even to someone who has profound disabilities. Don't take the wind out of those people just because you don't know where you're at. Now, let's take a look at a couple things that can be really, really challenging. Again, I did that thing called the Underground School Board. It talked about if you are taken out of society by the demands that go with caring for a special needs child, or even a bunch of toddlers, and you're not out in the social circles, the work environments, all those things are highly nuanced. And I say for the major part of the day, your communication partner for the first 2 years might be someone that says goo goo gaga and then translates to no, I don't have to. And so expect that when you walk into an IEP meeting, that there are going to be people that are highly educated. I mean, I barely finished high school, really. I've had bits and pieces of college classes that helped me with my career, but I barely finished high school, and there could be issues with me that were undiagnosed. I mean, if you can't tell, I have ADHD, like really bad. You can see it in my presentation, you can see it in my thought process and focus. I jump all over the map, I got 20 things going on. Look at my guitars, they're just, yard sale pinned onto everything. And I had somebody help me get them where they could play okay, and I had Tammy to tell the story. So this is a team thing, but expect when you walk into an IEP meeting, you're going to have people that are dressed for a professional work environment. They're going to be highly educated. They're going to be specialty educated. They're there to analyze things. They're there to listen and develop plans. So socially, it can be awkward. They have different ways of communicating that are different than our home. At home, you might say, listen, I told you to take out the trash 5 times. This is the 6th time. You're not going to hear things like that. It's going to be different than medical. It's typically a unionized or a represented environment. People can become easily offended. There's a certain amount of respect that goes with holding a therapist or a psychologist or an administrator a position. There are nuances about how that's communicated amongst people in education. And the communication is highly nuanced. You'll hear them say they have initials that mean everything, starting with IEP. Were you provided with a PWRN, whatever it is, prior written notice, all this stuff, and they're so used to using that language in their environment that you can feel massively overwhelmed in how people are talking, how you're understanding it, what your level of education is. Then they start asking you questions on the pre-IEP meeting. What level of schooling did you complete? Now, some people might be hit with that. Like, I feel highly unable or equipped to even participate in this, ranging from my education to how I communicate to what my clothing looks like and all this stuff. And the tables are full and they're all looking at you. So to summarize that part, just remember that we're not in a medical world anymore. We're in the educational world. We're stepping into an educational work environment that we're not used to being in. No one is coming with the attitude that you're a sped parent, that you are somehow less than everyone. If I see that as a school board member through repetitive cases coming to the back room, that's usually taken care of. I don't want to get too deep into that. But at the end of the day, assume positive intent and understand the missing piece of the puzzle that these people need to write the prescription that's going to help your child have improved access, which is the goal of this, is you. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about the process very quickly. Remember, no one is going to give your child a diagnosis of autism, regardless of what the doctor said, and pin that label on them when they're 3 or 4 years old. That's just irresponsible. Some kids develop earlier than later. Some people not looking at people does not make them autistic. People developing the need to speak to others. There's all kinds of things that can be happening here. So don't come in firing away. Well, the regional center doctor said that my child is autistic, and do not force a label like that lifelong on your child. We're not telling you to ignore anything, but the symptoms that are being exhibited that present a challenge don't have to have a label. They do require services, and following the right path and making discoveries in measurable increments is going to take you down that path, not disrupting the team. So, of course, you're going to come out of the regional center county program with a report, a release report that says this is this child, here's their history, here's where they're at now. Then the district will do its own assessment, put a psychologist on it, that's required. Or if something pops up while your child is in school, not all kids go into school with an issue that's discovered right away. It may present down the road, first grade, second grade, something like that. They're not going to grow out of it. Well, then the school district is required to have an IEP. You can tell the district, I have a concern over this I'm seeing, or the teacher might come to you and say, I'm seeing something that concerns me. We should do an assessment. We should have the child assessed. If you hear that and you fight back on that, I don't know what to tell you. Just kind of go with it. They're not there to undermine your child. But when it's determined that there needs to be an assessment, there's an assessment plan, qualified people will do the assessment, they'll issue a report, the report is given it to you. Encourage people that I like to have this in plenty of time for the IEP meeting so I understand it. Don't drag IEP meetings out thinking you're going to save something, because if I don't sign the IEP, we'll talk about that at the end, you just kind of make it look like I'm just not agreeing to anything. Everything is completely messed up. What situation do you know that is 100% messed up? But more so, there's going to be, I don't understand this. I'm confused about this. I don't understand how I can participate in this. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, so there's going to be some assessments. You can ask for the assessment plan. You have to sign for the child. If you're the educational rights holder or the parent or whatever, you'll sign for all those things. No one is just doing this stuff on their own. When all this comes together, then they start arranging for the IEP. You want to remember, IEPs are typically held annually. You can have some progress meetings along the way, but annually, and then every 3 years they have what's called a triennial, and that's where they do the big assessments over. They kind of take a look at what's happened and kind of chart the big framework of what's going to happen next and how to measure that by comparing it to the base data that's being collected in the past 3 years. And then the annual IEPs are fed by that also. There's a process here. People collect data, and that is the beauty of the process. Now, when you get there, the team is going to consist of most likely an administrator. The administrator is supposed to be there so they can answer for the district when it turns in, can we do this? I would like to see this. So you don't have a team sitting there going, yeah, that would be nice, that would be nice. But the person that's capable of making the financial and administrative decisions, or at least pushing that to the next level, they have to be there. Their focus is typically compliance and making sure that everything is done properly and has finances and all that type of thing. Now you're going to see a psychologist, and that psychologist is kind of like the person of most people that would have a Hippocratic oath like your doctor. You're there to ethically treat people in a way that's likely to help them, not delay them, not withhold care, all those types of things. So psychologists, they tend to be highly educated people, and they understand what this is. They may not understand what Cornelia de Lange's, don't expect that right away, but they're going to look at this, they're going to compare it against norms, and they're going to try to encourage the right people to become involved at the right level with the right frequency, etc. Then there's going to be therapists for each of the individual supports the child needs. It might be OT, it might be it won't be PT in school, it'll be adapted physical education, or AP, but you'll have occupational therapy, maybe speech language, you might have deaf and hard of hearing supports, you'll have any number of people, and those are professionals who are trained in what that specialty is. And they are trained professionals. They're not just somebody working on it and trying things and whatever. And again, that conversation we had with Tammy's OT, Jen, will kind of be a good guideline to you. You're going to have teachers. Your child's special day class teacher might be in there. There has to be a general education teacher in there, meaning somebody who teaches a regular second grade class that knows what the process is for getting second graders to go from last day of first grade, first day of second grade, to the point where they matriculate or move on to third grade. I will tell you, increasingly, there are school districts who are looking at, they may supply the special day class, pre-K, TK, all that kind of stuff, but when it comes time for the kids to enter first grade, there are districts who mainstream everybody. They don't want kids in special day class, because if you have 3 or 4 years of special day class and you have no exposure to the general everyday classroom setting, that can be seen as very restrictive, and some parents will look at that and say, that's what I want. And then later, 3 years later, when their child is very far behind and it's starting to show up in normal life and social situations, we'll turn around and say, you did not allow my child to have access to the least restrictive environment. So expect that people will not want to keep your child, especially as you approach first grade, in a special education day class. Okay, to frame this up again and keep myself on track, we are talking about these predeterminations that we have, that we're going to go into an IEP meeting based on what we've heard, what we've read on social media. Especially be really wary of those sites where you say something like, my child is having this, and you're flooded with, well, if you think that's bad, my child, and it's like it turns into this competition of who has the most miserable circumstances, and how we can have the least amount of faith in a system that has failed before we even give it a try. So if I sound like I'm pro school or something like that, remember, I've got a birth date, a death date, I've got years of service, making sure there's equitable stuff going on to all the kids in the community. I don't answer to the school district, I answer to the people who are my neighbors. And I certainly wouldn't take something from the other kids to make sure that Tam had something that was not going to benefit her in the end. And while I have this opportunity, there's a ton of people out there who have had access to Tammy. Tammy made a big impact on this world, and it's becoming larger even though she's gone. It's crazy. But back to the one-on-one aid thing. You want to remember that you're going to have a propensity to think, I'm there all the time. That may be your wife, where you're working, you come home, you've got the pressures of work 24/7. sometimes sit down with your spouse or partner and say, how are you doing? And expect them to say, I'm not doing well. This and this and this and this and this. Figure out how you can take a little piece of that, just one little piece, even right then, and do something about it. You'll feel like you're involved. But remember, it's going to be really easy for someone who has to care for their child all the time. It's difficult feedings, it's behaviors, it's not sleeping, it's doctor visits, it's watching out so things don't provide stimulus that's unnecessary, so it turns into behaviors. Sometimes the way to feel that won't happen so much is that there will be somebody there that will be an aide in the classroom that will take over your function when you're not there. And that's a natural reaction, but it's not one that's going to help your child grow, expand, and become more social and become part of the social network. As Jen said, she got to the point where unzipping a lunchbox and opening up a sandwich bag had Tammy eating with her mainstream peers, not sitting next to them. So be open to what they're saying about a one-on-one aid and how restrictive it is. Now, the difference is, there was a time when Tammy was in special day class, she was rolling around on the floor. There were behavioral issues. She was very tiny. There's nothing wrong with expecting that your child will be safe, especially if they have low or no safety awareness. And so that is something that can be discussed. It's not a demand going in the first day. It's let's discuss this. And so they have, when it comes to actual IEP meeting day, so you've had the notice of the meeting, you know you're supposed to be there. Keep in your mind what I've told you about what the people are going to be like. You can expect that. Imagine if you took one person from the IEP team to your family reunion, and they got to meet that one uncle and that, your sister-in-law. You think of it that way. If I can put something in your head to make you smile on the day that the pressure comes, that's my whole point. But at the end, you're going to walk in, you know that you have an eligibility or you wouldn't be there. That eligibility might not have been proven or something. You may be told in the IEP meeting there's not enough here to put your child in a special day class. There is enough to supply this level of support. Now, some people right away, oh, you're wrong. I'm going to get an independent assessment at the district's expense because they read these books right here and they know it's their right. Yeah, you do have those rights, but when you start getting into that world of people, they're going to kind of take a look. They know what the law says. They know what the intent is. And if you're out of line, hopefully you can get one that will tell you, yeah, I think you need to kind of give this a little bit more time and find safety in the fact that the IEP is going to lay out things based on the assessment, on the report, and then they're going to ask you about your child's strengths and challenges, and we'll talk about that in a second because that can be very uncomfortable. And then what's going to happen is you're going to hear a lot of rigmarole that you don't understand, where some therapist is saying X number of days per week, minutes per session, the child will, and then do these things and their goals, and they will have measures within the goal. And you'll hear things like, on 4 of 7 attempts with minimal overhand prompting, the child will develop cursive signature of the letter B, D, and Z on 4 of 7 attempts. And you're like, what does all this mean? Well, it's measured. So what it says is, within the assessment, it says that there's going to be this challenge, and in order to work through that challenge and get to the next level, we're going to work on this specific subset, and within 3 months we should be able to see this, and that goal now becomes this until the end of the year. Again, it's really easy to become defensive because you don't understand everything, but that's what the process does. It's a measure of a baseline to figure out, is this actually going down the right path? Is something else being uncovered? Are we making progress? Okay, that's going to lead into some questions about reporting. How often do I need to know this? Because back when I was with the regional center, before they hit 3 years old, I was taking them to the therapist. I got to see the therapist when I dropped my child off. I got to talk to the therapist every day to see how it was going. I got my homework assignment. That goes away for the most part. Some people want a daily log. I want you to write down what you said and what you did and all this kind of thing. For a child that cannot communicate that themselves, that's more of a question than a demand. Knowing that Tammy could not talk, knowing that she was not real good with everybody understanding her signs. Her signs were approximated because of her fine motor skills. This is on and on thing. How will we know? Did Tammy take care of the basic functions? Did she eat? Was there a behavioral issue? Was there something that triggered her? Talk about how that would be communicated to you on a level where you can feel good enough not to demand a one-on-one aid. That's a good strategy. You need to understand the terms of the IEP, and just, if you don't know how to do that, the thing you want to know is kind of like if you take your kid to the doctor and they have something and they give you a prescription, you might say, is there any downsides to this? What can we expect? What will it look like in 3 days? Those are all kind of relevant questions that would apply to this process as well. And you want to remember something. If it is not in the IEP, it doesn't exist. Don't spend all your time discussing theoretics and then feeling 3 days after the IEP, I should have never have signed that. I feel like I got tricked. Paranoia kicks in. Conspiracy theory. Everybody's out to get you because you went out and talked to the people in the parking lot and they made you feel like, what, did you finally agree with these people? What is wrong with you? You are hurting your child, whatever. But, for example, it might be in the structured notes, which is at the end of it. Somebody is sitting there typing what's being said. They're trying to capture it, like the minutes of the meeting. And, of course, you have the right to go through it after the IEP. You don't have to sign the IEP immediately. If somebody's doing that to you, no. But you do have to sign that you were there. Don't confuse you signing that I attended the IEP. Don't refuse to look at the statement, I feel like I was provided access, and don't let the order of things confuse you. Some districts have it where you sign the IEP for the whole thing up here and then the other stuff, and then finally at the bottom will say, I agree with the terms of the IEP except expressly for this and this and this. But remember, if it's not in the IEP, it doesn't exist. It's not measurable. So if there's an AAC device coming in, I did an episode about that and the slippery slope that is. But what would that look like in the IEP? Well, using an AAC device, it wouldn't be blended with a bunch of other stuff. The child will be able to do this function on the device X number of times with the following supports, X, and so there's a measure at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And so they're able to look at 3 months, how's it going? Their skill set's improving. Tammy never wanted to use the AAC device to communicate. She would basically only use it to say, hey, you're not listening to me. I've been signing, I've been doing this forever. So there has to be a proficiency goal for the student in the IEP for it to be real. The IEP is not a measure of the staff. Remember that. It's a measure of how your child is responding to the supports that they are being given for their eligibility. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about something called a facilitated IEP meeting. I think that some school districts, or SELPA's, Special Education Local Plan Area, is what they have in California. So it's a group of districts in one regional group that the funding goes to. It's dispersed from there. There's training, supports, and things offered through the SELPA. Now, the movement out here for facilitated IEP meetings came from there. And the intent is, if you're a parent and you walk into this meeting, we've discussed how you might feel that you're not, that's not the right place for you, you don't fit, you're self-conscious about all kinds of things. And it's just like you're overwhelmed by this group of people who are there to tell you what to do with your child. And if you say something, they just immediately jump in with their vast level of experience and tell you, no, that's not typically what happens. I think you're still struggling with understanding, or whatever. So it became very combative and a mistrustful relation. Is that a real word? Anyway, so they had what is called a facilitated IEP meeting. So you'll have someone who is kind of like the moderator is the best word. Now, they're likely a district employee and all that, but their job there is to conduct the process smoothly, try to help people understand what's next. And what they do is they start off by asking you, tell us about your child's strengths. Now, this can be very, very difficult for some people, because if you have a child that has profound disabilities, needs medical supports, has behavioral issues, has neurological issues, has motility issues, has mobility issues, you're kind of sitting there and you might be thinking, they smile at me. It's very difficult sometimes to navigate that. It can almost make you feel like, are you serious? Do you not see my child? Did you not read the report? And then they'll ask you, well, what kind of challenges do you think your child has? And you get somebody that is highly educated, maybe they're on the spectrum themselves. You know, there are people that have ADHD that have really good paying jobs and are representative of, whatever they might be. Everyone's not perfect. But if you start feeling like those questions are disingenuous, the whole process goes out the window right there. And it's a well-meaning, the meaning behind it was, positive. Let's have the parents, in actuality, be able to tell us, so what did that look like in Tammy's life? Well, she understood what music was. She could rock, she could strum, and it was actually a breakthrough moment. So what breakthrough moment is there waiting for you to communicate for your child to a team that does not understand anything about your child, is still trying to figure out what Cornelia DeLange is, what the different wide range of manifestations are. They don't know your child. So think about it. What is it that you know about your child that might give a little bit of a hint? That child is understanding what's going on here. That child is happy. This child is being exposed to this, and it's causing anxiety that's triggering these behaviors that aren't really representative of the child in another environment. You need to think that out. Only you can support those questions and inform the process with the right answer. Always remember that. Let's talk about the end of the meeting before I go all the way back to the beginning of the meeting and give you a couple of strategies that you should encourage if you're not seeing them in your school. But end of the meeting. I don't understand this. I don't trust this. Well, that can go a couple of places. Like I said, 3 days after I signed the IEP, I felt pressure. I signed the whole thing. I just got snow jobbed. They put me in an emotional place asking me what my child's strengths were. They did this and this and this out in the parking lot. Yeah, they always do that. They did that to this other person, but I'm not stupid enough. I got an advocate. By the way, real advocates, most of them don't like to be called advocates because it kind of says, I'm here to fight with you because you're not doing the right thing. Yeah, so I'm just not signing the IEP. That is ridiculous, because what it says about you is I don't trust anything about this whole process, the whole thing, all this process that's mandated by federal law, state law. I have rights to due process along the way. The whole thing is just not trustable. I'm not signing anything, and I just don't trust any of you or the whole process. That is not a reasonable assumption. That's like saying, again, like I said earlier, everything is suspect. In my world, that's called paranoia. Okay? So, there may be some things that you don't understand or you don't feel comfortable with in the process. So what you can do is you can sign, I agree with all parts of the IEP except 1, 2, 3. Now if you sign that, the stuff that you're not having an issue with, that kicks off and the services start, everything moves. But if you don't do that, then everything is stalled because you won't even sign for part of the IEP. And by the way, you using not signing the IEP as a stay put order isn't doing anybody any good. Now, let's look at some things that some progressive districts are doing now that move the process along and lessen the likelihood that you're going to get to the end of the meeting and people are either not signing the IEP or calling for emergency IEP meetings. What is that? You cannot allow someone to be stalled every 3 days, every 2 weeks by you knee-jerking, I need to get the whole team together, I'm just not comfortable with this. And there's not enough time to pass for someone to go, okay, those goals, with minimal prompting, a verbal, using the AAC device, sign language, nodding, gazing, the child will, on 4 of 7 attempts. That all sounds like ridiculous stuff, but if there's not a measure of that, you don't know if you're on the right path, and you don't know if maybe something's going to pop up where they go, it's not even that, it's this, let's support this. Remember the difficulty you had getting the diagnosis, trying to get someone to tell you what might be best for your CdLS child, dealing with doctors who have never seen it before. You have an advantage by knowing how to deal with the unknown. Be civil and take it for, use that to help your child. Some school districts are recognizing that there's some mistrust, there's misunderstanding, and the way this is communicated is sometimes difficult. You'll see the program saying things like, we are offering support to parents at no cost or low cost to understand the IEP process, to understand how it works. And if you get the wrong administrator doing how this looks, it sounds like the sympathetic view of, hey, dumb parent, you don't know how good we are, you just want to run your mouth, you want to be difficult, and you just don't know, you're not educated enough to understand, or your communication skills are terrible, so you can't just tell us what you're worried about. If you get one of those administrators and you're the superintendent, you really need to have a look. Remember, you're talking to somebody here that is on a school board, and if you're bringing me cases in the back room and I'm finding out that's what's being communicated, I start questioning your ability to maintain your clientele, which is the students of this district whose parents voted for me. That's not a comfortable position for you to be in with me. Next thing, working for a governmental agency where service being provided reasonably, predictably, and for a decent cost, and most importantly, measurably, with measured outcomes. If you don't have that in your mind and you're impressed with your own wordsmithing, I'm having a problem with that too. Finally, if you're looking at me as a parent who feels very, very empty because I've lost something, again, when you have an end date on your child's life and you're looking back on it and the story's over, you start getting really, really deep into what I could have done differently. So here, if you're a school administrator and you're watching this, I want you to think about this. Think about all the money that's spent on due process cases, or when an attorney makes a request for the school records for one Tamara A. Fallsgraf. This is 1 year IEP. Lawyers all over the place. I don't want to get into it. What did that cost for the school district to pull all these records? What did it cost to get for the lawyer to get somebody to try to write something? Yeah, I'm looking at something right here. Oh boy. What does all that cost? What if you had somebody that could get on the phone with a parent and say, I know where you're at. I had an IEP myself. I had something that necessitated my IEP, and one of my children requires IEP support because it's a genetic thing. I know how you feel. I've been there. But my job is to prepare you for what to expect in the IEP meeting. My job is to tell you to prepare your concerns. Tell me what you're most concerned about. Tell me what would make you feel like you're not leaving your child at risk to a bunch of people you don't know. That's really the question, isn't it? Let me help you understand what some of the outcomes are if you can't express what you're really worried about enough to feel like, okay, I feel a little bit better about this. And what if we take charge of the situation by getting you ready and then presenting the district with what your concerns are, what your questions are, even what your child's strengths and challenges are before the meeting. Now, that is odd advice because if a district does that, it's called predetermination, where you get everybody together. You can tell these IEPs where things are happening like that because there's a very certain, you have to sit here. You have to, yeah, so when you say something, the guy over here that you can't see is looking and tapping on his face up here with the guy on the virtual access, completely checked out, typing emails about something out, finishing the Amazon order while signing a Christmas card to somebody. Yeah, I know. That's not the norm, at least hopefully. But you're able to provide this and not feel like you're going into a room where everything's prearranged, take it or get it, take it or leave it, and then, you know, when you start to ask questions, of course, your appearance, your dress, your educational levels, suddenly that you start getting in your own head. But anyway, there's programs like this. They're confidential. The person works with you. Some districts will pay for this. Think about it. Is it worth the investment to bring somebody in that's going to help the person be ready to come in and be really clear in their communications and actually feel like, wow, I know the administrator was here, the general ed teacher, the SPED teacher, all the therapists and psychologists, but I was an integral part in helping them understand my child, and I'm going to be able to communicate from home what I'm seeing as a result of what they're doing over there. And you got this teamwork thing rather than this mess of paranoia, mistrust, and a mischaracterization of the whole school system by somebody in the parking lot. My name is on one of them board plaques. I take what I do and the reputation of my school district very deeply. At the end of the day, Tam was supposed to graduate and be part of the graduation ceremony. And they put an empty chair out there with her picture on it. And I had kids walking by me, shaking my hand, hugging me, and telling me how sorry they were for what I was going through, when it was supposed to be all about the finest moment of their life when they graduated and finished 13, 14-year career of being a professional student. Yeah, that's what it's all about. So if you're thinking about what you can do in your school district, think about that. I think these are great programs. They usually fall under an ADR, alternative dispute resolution type name. Remember, school people don't always give things names. We would, sometimes they tend to overthink things that may be outside of the limits we would put on everyday life. Our lives as parents, workers, community members, neighbors, and parents and family members sometimes doesn't involve a big vocabulary and all kinds of goal writing. But be positive, and if you don't have one of those programs, pretend you do. You're always free to send me an email. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get involved and be writing reports just because I have some attachment to the organization, and I'm just going to use my experience. I need to shut that down now. Anyway, your IEP meeting will end with you being given a document. They have to give you the document. You know, somebody is taking notes. Some people record the meeting. Some people have to, people recording a meeting, 2 districts being involved in intra-district transfer, one person issuing the IEP, the other district deciding that they should go in there and change things around after it was issued. The next thing you got this going on, you got lawyers and you got big problems. But at the end, you're going to be able to see that there's a list of who was there. There was a discussion of the eligibility. There's a discussion of what the previous goals, if there were any. If this is a new one, you won't have that. But there's a comparison against average, the big stuff, reading, writing, arithmetic, where the child is there, whether they're eligible for testing, whether you want them to be, what their goals are, what their current levels are, how they communicate, functional skills. The individual therapists that are there will give an update of, you know, what happened between the last IEP and this one based on the frequency, the quarterly, whatever it is, an annual review. And there's a section in here where they talk about what kinds of outside things may be affecting this health. CdLS people will be there. And then it goes into the goals, the framework of things. Goals look like this. There's dates, there's measures, there's past benchmarks discussed, what the short-term and long-term objectives are. And at the end, you end up with an accommodations page that says your child will receive these level of services, your child will be given extra time on a test, your child can be any number of things. And at the end of it, it's pretty predictable that you can look through all that, you can ask questions, and then you'll take it home, you'll review it, and then you'll decide what you're going to do. Okay, finally, let's close this out. I need you to know that I got 20 years into being the parent of Tammy. I have approaching 25 years in the position of the public servant in being administrator of a program for very high-end, service-orientated results, measurable outcomes public agency, and I spent 5 years in the school board meetings before I ran or was elected, and ran several more times as an incumbent, a school board member. So I have 15 years into that part, and so I kind of get the bigger picture. I expect the parents will receive some consideration when we kind of take a look at their situation. I would expect that special education professionals will look at something like CdLS and not be sympathetic to it, but to understand the limitations that come with the unknowns of how to effectively service people. I don't expect them to be abused by people, by parents who are abusive, uninformed, worried, mistrustful. But I would expect that there is an environment of basic trust, and that's communicated, and it's pretty clear that people care about you when you go into the meeting. Parents, I know what the chart said from CdLS. Once I knew where TAM was at, I could read them along the way. I could see what the outcome was going to be. That's been confirmed now that the story is over. And there's a fine line between being so hopeful that reality never kicks in. If you're happy with the little goals and the achievement of those goals that you see that are measured quarterly, that's going to give you moments of peace and quiet when being ready to dump the baby out with the bathwater every time somebody says something that you don't agree with, that you found better on the internet. Just remember, sometimes if you're living in California, California might not be the right place to get the best peaches in the world, and meanwhile, Georgia might not be the best place to surf. I don't know. Ultimately, you are typically facing with a CdLS challenge all kinds of things that will limit your life to one extent, but may enhance you as an individual. Use your influence as a parent and a person to always make sure that the group of CdLS parents that educators see are seen as people who deserve respect. I haven't always been that person. But I hope you'll make up for that. Just remember, sometimes the situation is such that maybe it's not the right place for you. Maybe there's something else going on. But when you're preparing for an IEP, find the resources. Talk to the CdLS Foundation. They have teachers over there. I have people that are going to be on the show that dealt with Tammy. Find out what you can do to be informed, where you're able to use your time to offer what you know rather than to question what everybody else does. I swear I try to keep these things short. I could have went on for much longer. But send me an email, let me know, and I'll try to lighten this up with something a little bit better, like how things were at the Southern California family gathering in Irvine, and where that guitar right there, where it went to and how that worked out. I will see you next time.